Hey guys, welcome back to According To. I'm Megan.
And I'm Ciera. Megan and I are back with another book episode for the podcast. So I think, what have we done so far for book episodes?
I want to say I thought we only did one before.
I think we have only done one, but do you remember what it was? It was just like our favorite books.
I don't know. We did it forever ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
And today we wanted to give you guys our top 5 books. Since we've kind of like restarted our reading journey, like spring of 2021, we feel like these books are the ones where if you haven't been a reader but you want to get back into it, we'd recommend these ones. And we have like a couple different genres here too, so there's going to be something for everyone.
Like, trust me, I could recommend so many romance books that like I feel like would get a lot of people out of a reading slump, but not everyone's into romance. And so we picked like one romance and then some other books from some other genres that hopefully one will pique your interest.
So obviously go into sharing our weekly spotlights as well, but Ciera, to be honest, Ciera did most of the planning for this episode, so props to her.
Thank you.
But we've both read all of the books that we're going to talk about. Also, something to point out too is that Ciera, on her own, she thought of 5 books that she would recommend for people to read if they were wanting to get back into reading or if they're in a reading slump. And so just for fun, she was kind of like, you go ahead and you pick out the books that you think would be your top 5. And we picked out the same books. Or I said kind of like 2 for one genre where I was like, it'd be one of these ones that I'd want, but it still matched one of the ones that Ciera said. And I mean, I was just looking at like our entire bookshelf, and some of them like were super easy. And then some of them I was just like, for this genre, like, what do I think would be a good one? And pretty impressed by the fact that we picked the same 5.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is that, you'd think it'd be like, oh, like, let me just shout out my, like, 5-star favorites. And, like, that would be kind of like the podcast is just going over our 5 stars. But I think it's, like, a very distinct difference between, like, books that I rate 5 stars. Granted, we're going to share some 5-star books here. But we're going to share some 4 stars, too. And we've, like, excluded some 5 stars because it's just, like, I don't know if that's the book to get you back into reading.
Mm-hmm. So, or like these might have like a wider net of people that might enjoy the books rather than some of our 5 stars.
Because I'm also trying to like capture, like Megan said, cast a wider net so that like it'll catch anyone that wants to start reading. Some of the books that I've given 5 stars might be like 5 stars for me and like this specific group of people, but maybe not for everyone. So we want these books to be very broad in appeal.
Okay, before we jump into more book related stuff, let's talk about our weekly spotlights. So, do you have a weekly spotlight to share?
My weekly spotlight, honestly, I mean, I did have a good first week at my clinical, but it was nice just coming back home this weekend. I'm kind of lonely in Cedar Rapids, so it was nice to be around people again.
My weekly spotlight is I really like the hours of my clinical so far. Granted, I got off early 3 days of the first week. But it was just nice. Like, the day goes by, like, really quite fast, honestly, which is nice because I'm not, like, staring at the clock, just, like, waiting for the day to be done. So I've been enjoying it so far. We can talk a little bit about just our first week overall. Ciera actually vlogged her entire first week. So
if you want to see that,
it's already up on our channel. And then I will be uploading my week in my life this next week. Like, I'll be recording it, and so since this comes out Thursday, it'll be uploaded this coming weekend. So I'm doing acute care. That was not the original plan when I first went and picked my final terminal clinicals. I was supposed to be doing inpatient rehab, and then I found out, like, during my first clinical that fell through due to staffing, and so I ended up getting moved to doing acute care, which really, like, I was overall pretty okay with it. Like, I don't know. You gotta roll with the punches. So I am doing that, and I'm on a cardiopulmonary floor for the most part. Acute care is kind of acute care, in my opinion. So it is not super specific on the floor you're on. / they've had to kind of like do some combining of floors too, just because of like staffing issues. And then I've also seen a little bit of outpatient like joint replacement surgeries. We'll go and see them before they go home. And then we also technically do like the cardiac ICU as well. Haven't been down there a whole lot, but kind of getting a good mix. And I really like all of the like people that I'm working with, and I've kind of been with like a few different therapists just to be flexible and whatnot. But what I like about acute care, and this is kind of the case with inpatient rehab too, but you get there and instead of like jumping straight into like you're there, patient number 1 right away, you have time to chart review. You're seeing like what kind of changes have happened overnight, if anything. You're checking, at least in acute care, like lab values. How are those looking? Is there anything that like you need to be aware of? And you have like a good hour or so to like check on things and then decide kind of which patients you want to see at least that morning. And then we go do that. We are oftentimes like communicating with like the nurses beforehand or after, or like there's care coordinators that we're talking with afterwards to try and figure out what else do they need to do before they go home or what else needs to be figured out. And then we go to lunch. And then after lunch, we might spend like a little bit of time charting some stuff from that morning, or we'll start reviewing other patients if you want to check additional things for like patients we're seeing in the afternoon. And then once we finish all of that, then we still have time at the end of the day to do charting, which I haven't done a whole lot of charting yet. I've tried one eval note and one like follow-up note just to kind of like start figuring out how to use the software and stuff, but that's going to start increasing. And a lot of my first week, I was just kind of like an extra hand to help out, and then I'm going to start doing more these coming weeks. So, yeah.
Good stuff. For my rotation, so I'm doing inpatient rehab, and we'll see patients for up to an hour and a half each day. And so they for sure get an hour and a half of PT, but sometimes they're with another PT or a PTA for like some of their other sessions. And they'll split it up, usually having an hour session and then a half hour session in the morning versus the afternoon. So I've been able to like work with 2 patients during this first week fully on my own. Kind of like the good thing about inpatient rehab is that you see them every single day, so you kind of get caught up on like what's going on with them and what activities to do with them pretty fast, which has been nice. It's kind of cool to see like how quickly I can like gain my independence with that. So I've been doing some notes for that. It's a very nice facility that I'm at, so there's like a lot of like things that we can do. They have like this harness system set up in the gym to help with like walking and stuff. They have a car in the gym, which is pretty common in a lot of inpatient rehab settings, to like practice getting in and out of cars for transfers. And yeah, just like some other cool stuff there that we get to use. And I also like my schedule, so I work 8 to 4:30 usually. And like Megan, I have kind of like that first hour from 8 to 9 to do some reviewing of like their charts and stuff. We get like a morning update from like nursing about like how the patients did overnight, any changes. We don't ever really have any like, there's usually like no times that we don't see a patient because they're usually all pretty stable at that point. And then we have an hour at the end of the day too. So we're done at 3:30. We have 3:30 to 4:30 to document. So that's kind of nice to have that built-in documentation
and
time.
Then Ciera's favorite thing is a CI that has kids, yeah. And they gotta go home.
Yeah. I've just noticed that every time I have a CI that has kids, they're like, all right, well, I'm going home. And I'm like, nice. Versus some CIs who don't have children, it's like, they don't really care if they like stay later and stuff.
And then they also don't care if you as the student
but you know,
later.
It's nice to have a CI who's like, well, I gotta go, so you can go too.
Something else too is like, and I'm still like not 100% sure, like, do I see myself immediately doing like outpatient versus an inpatient position once I graduate? But it's nice in inpatient, you have some downtime. You have some time to just like get your ducks in a row and reset a little bit, versus like outpatient. I mean, like, your only off time if you have a full schedule is your lunch. And otherwise it is patients back to back to back to back, no break at all. Or some clinics even have like overlapping time slots.
I swear,
and it's nice to
could
just
never
like
work at a clinic with overlapping time slots. Like, I'm gonna try my hardest to not do that.
It's nice to just have a moment. That's all.
To breathe.
Yeah. Even like there was a patient when I was like at my last one, we were doing outpatient, you know, and you just kind of get used to it. But like one of the patients was asking just like, so do you have like patients like every, like all the time, all day? And we were like, yeah. And they're like, you don't even get like 5 minutes? And like, sure, you find like, you might like run to go to the bathroom in between patients here and there, but like you you don't really have like 5 minutes or
No.
to have anything unless someone like cancels or something or is late. So yeah, that's the kind of quick catch up. And so now we have 8 weeks to go before graduation.
Crazy. All right, so Megan already kind of touched on us getting like into reading back in 2021. So I feel like our story is pretty similar to a lot of other people who like are getting back into reading or like started reading again as they like kind of like were in college and like maybe like getting in their first jobs and stuff. And so in middle school, like we were huge readers. Like we read all the time. Always had like our little free reading books with us. Our mom would even like buy us books here and there to like read on our own at home. And then I feel like you get to high school and it's like you don't really have like that free reading time anymore, and so you don't like bring a book with you.
Like the only books we really read in high school was like when we had those assigned books that we had to read like for class, and so that was it.
And then like I don't think I ever checked out like a book from the high school library. Like I didn't go to the library that often in high school, and so you just like lose that. And I feel like since no one's telling you to read and you're busy with other stuff too, you like don't think to read. And then obviously I go to college, reading is not on my mind because I am busy trying to figure out how college works and stuff. And it wasn't until we got to grad school and I would just like see, in my opinion, like reading just like kind of got big on social media. I feel like it started with the pandemic, but then even beyond that, like obviously the pandemic really started in 2020 and we didn't start reading until like a full year later basically. And so I feel like I just kept seeing people that I followed on social media like talking about the books that they were reading, and I was like, I love the idea of reading.
And at the time I remember just being like, when do I have time? When would I possibly have time to read? Because I felt like I already had so much in my day that it was like, I don't have any other time to devote to reading. But what started off, being on vacation helped first to like kickstart because I was like, okay, we have a week or so here where I'm not really focusing on school at all. And, it was kind of like the ideal of we're going to a beach. Let's do the whole like relax on the beach, bring a book with us. Like I've never really done that before.
Yeah, I've always been, if I'm on like a relaxing vacation, it's always been like, let me put in my AirPods, listen to a podcast, or like listen to music, and that's what I've just done, which is nice, relaxing. Like I love that. But I was like, let's try reading and like see if we can entertain ourselves with something else. And so that's when like we went to like Barnes and Noble, and like keep in mind I had like read I think 2 books at this point prior to like spring break or whatever this trip was. It wasn't spring break, but it was like in May or something. And so I was like, I knew at the start of 2021, I was like, I'm gonna read at least 3 books this year because I wanted to be a reader. And I was
that's
like,
so funny, like looking back on that goal now.
And so
it shows how much it can overtake you.
Really, I read my first book during winter break, and I was like, okay, nice, I got 1 book under my belt. And then I read.
Do you remember that?
I read the first
what
2.
the
I think
first book was.
My first 2 were both Agatha Christie. So the first one was
so interesting because like you kind of like really went into that like classic.
That's because that's what I thought I would like.
Realm.
So I read Murder on the Orient Express, and then I read And Then There Were None. And Then There Were None, great book. I would highly recommend it if you are looking to read it. It's not one of our books that we're recommending, but
they also have a limited series,
like a BBC.
It's like a 2-episode thing. That was good, which is why I don't know if I would have read the book anyways, but Ciera was like, we have to watch this, and I'm not waiting for you to read the book. So, and it was well done, I thought.
But yeah, at that point I had read those 2 books, but then I kind of fell off. School started, I got busy, and I wasn't really thinking about reading that much. I think I started The Murder of Roger Ackroyd.
The Merger.
Yeah, I combined my words there. And then I like fell off, stopped reading it basically. But for this vacation, I was like, okay, we're going to read. So we went to Barnes & Noble, got our
I've always loved Barnes & Noble. I really I love it so much more now that I actually like am caring to like look at the book covers, figure out if I'd actually read the book or not.
Yeah, like you always like the vibe, but I was always like, I don't read. Like,
so I'm not going to buy books.
But now that we do buy books and we love to read, we're like,
now it's
oh
like I go and
so
I'm just
fun.
like, I really shouldn't.
Yeah.
And I try to be like, don't buy anything, Megan.
And so Megan picks up The Silent Patient and November 9th for her 2 books. And then I pick up...
Which, they were so good to get back into reading. Both of those are on this list.
They are. And then I picked up The Inheritance Games and Confess for my first 2, like, not first 2, but like to really get back into it. And so we each brought one book, I think, on vacation just because we didn't want to pack 2 books each.
We didn't think we'd like finish them.
Yeah. We each finished our book.
We each finished our books and we did a little swap.
And I think we both finished those books by the time we came back from vacation as well. So that definitely, and I think even coming back, we still had a couple days left of break before going back to school. And so like we both finished reading all 4 of those books before we went back to school, I think. Or at least 3 of them.
Yeah. And I did not think I could read books that fast. Like if you would have told me before like that I was reading more than a book a week, I would have been like insane. No. And granted we were on spring break, so we had time to do that.
But like I remember Confess was like the fastest I read a book when I like first started reading.
Like just like since I still am like right now I'm working like a full-time job, I still finished like if you're reading a good book, and granted Ciera's been gone so I haven't had like a whole lot of other stuff to do, like my schedule is not busy when I get home and off of work, but I read like a 360-page book in like 3 days, just because I would read like solid chunks. Like I'd read like 2 or 3 hours a night, but when you have like when I was getting off at like 3 on my early days or like 4, it didn't take up my whole entire evening necessarily. So
and again, the point is like not just being like, oh, I gotta read to like read. Like we want to make this a fun and enjoyable hobby.
It really
sometimes
is like, what I really don't like is to be a book hater, because anything, if you enjoy reading it, then that's all that matters, because you should look forward to, I'm someone where I read for escapism. I appreciate like a good nonfiction or historical fiction read here and there, but I really truly like the thing that gets me to read and want to like just keep like all I want to do is finish reading this book is if I truly feel like I escape into that world and just like need to know what happens to these characters. So that's like my main focus when I read, and not so much like some people, if they read, they really try to put it on themselves as like it's a learning opportunity. They want to grow, they want to learn. So a lot of people delve into like the self-help genre or like educational books, whatever floats your boat. That's just not
that is not what we're sharing today.
No.
I'm trying to think of anything else. Like that was definitely the kickstart.
I think some people go into it thinking like if I'm going to read, like that's what I'm going to do, and then it doesn't become the fun thing that you want to do. So if that's you, then maybe explore other books that you wouldn't think to read because you don't think reading for fun is like worth your time.
And like I definitely like did not expect to like the romance genre as much as I do. Like the romance genre is probably like my favorite at this point, but I said the books that I first like started out with, and those were like YA, like mystery, kind of like whodunit type of stuff, which is still fun. But, I was like, oh, I don't know if romance is like my thing. And I do like it a lot. So, like we never like watch a ton of like rom-coms or anything. Like those types of movies aren't exactly our favorite. And so I was surprised with how much I enjoyed just reading romance.
Okay, so let's get started with the first book that we are going to recommend. This would be, like, I would say this is the most wide-reaching, widest net of a book that I could recommend to, like, literally anyone.
Yeah, I would literally recommend it to anyone.
So, we've talked about her before, and that's Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. He is also the same author that wrote The Martian, which has been made into a movie. It's a great movie. And we've passed this book along to quite a few. Well, technically our mom listened to the audiobook. Haley and Ashton, we gave this to them to read. They both rated it 5 stars. We both rated it 5 stars. It is such a good book. So we're not really great at doing our own little summaries without
messing it up or making it confusing.
So
these are from Goodreads.
These are the summaries of the books. So I'm going to start off by reading that because obviously I think, you guys probably want to know at least a little bit what the book is about. And so let's do that. So Ryland Grace is the main character. He is the sole survivor on a desperate last chance mission, and if he fails, humanity and the earth itself will perish. Except that right now, he doesn't know that. He can't even remember his own name, let alone the nature of his assignment or how to complete it. All he knows is that he's been asleep for a very, very long time, and he's just been awakened to find himself millions of miles from home with nothing but 2 corpses for company. His crewmates dead, his memories fuzzily returning, Ryland realizes that an impossible task now confronts him. Hurtling through space on his tiny ship, it's up to him to puzzle out an impossible scientific mystery and conquer an extinction-level threat to our species. And with the clock ticking down and the nearest human being light years away, He's got to do it all alone. Or does he? Now.
I just scream. I love it.
I went into this book fairly blind, other than knowing
you should go into it knowing nothing more than that. Like, we're going to talk about it.
Look at nothing else related to this book, and just start reading. Okay.
So, going into when we're discussing this idea for a podcast, I was like, okay, we could just like fangirl over these books for
but then that
10 minutes each. But let's see if we can find a way to make this more helpful for you guys. And so I was thinking to myself, like, what makes a good book for getting back into reading? And clearly I couldn't think of it myself. So I found an article from masterclass.com titled "What Makes a Book Great? The 5 Elements of a Good Book." And there's no specific author. It just says it's written by Masterclass. So sorry to whoever wrote this. But they basically give 5 elements. And so we kind of, for each book, are going to run through how we think the books that we picked out fit these 5 elements. So the first one is a strong opening. And I'm going to go ahead and read what they have put down for what makes a strong opening. A great book grabs readers' attention from the first page and doesn't let it go until they've reached the end of the book. That's why a strong opening is one of the most important elements of book writing. For both nonfiction and fiction writers, the opening of a book offers an opportunity to introduce your main character, highlight your unique narrative voice, and convey the stakes of your storyline. A great novel will also use its opening pages to establish or subvert the conventions of the book's genre. For instance, readers expect a thriller to begin with immediate action, or a fantasy novel to start with a scene in a new world. Either way, great literature is only as strong as its opening, and the first few pages may be the difference between someone reading the entire book and leaving it on the library shelf.
So the strong opening in this book is you're thrown into the confusion just like the main character is, because you only know what he knows and he doesn't know anything. So you're already trying to figure out what's going on. Why doesn't he remember what's going on? How is he going to figure out what is going on and what he's supposed to be doing there? And some people kind of don't like sciencey stuff. I didn't know if I would or not, but I really feel like the sciencey stuff that is in this book, I thought some of it was intriguing. It's obviously fiction, but it was done in a way where a lot of it was still real science.
And you kind of feel smart when you can understand what they're going for.
Because the main character's using science to try and figure out what's going on. He has to solve just problem after problem keeps coming his way, and he keeps need to do his best to use science to figure out how to work past that.
I think that, so I just looked at, I pulled these books off our shelves yesterday just to kind of get an idea of the writing style and the openings and stuff. And this book literally opens up with someone saying what's 2 + 2? And I feel like you're like, what is going on? And so you hear this, he hears this computer voice, he's just waking up, has no idea what's going on. And so I when I was reading that, just being I'm confused too. I don't know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You have to keep reading to try and make any sense of what's going on at all. So that's, I think, why I thought that was a strong opening, was
mm-hmm.
I was just as lost as he was.
The other part too, so this is the second thing in that article that what makes a good book, compelling characters. And when I tell you the characters in this book, the main characters are the most intriguing characters that I've probably ever read. They are so likable. The dialogue and banter is funny. And I remember, I don't know, it was Jack Edwards was the one that he hyped this book up a lot too. And so he's kind of the one that put this book recommendation in the back of my mind. But he said that he was literally laughing out loud at some parts. And I did the same thing, which you don't really find yourself just laughing at a book silently reading too often. But my heart was just warm when I would see the main characters just interacting. It was just a very fun experience, and I enjoyed their friendship a lot.
And I think the other thing is that there's such high stakes in this book that there's some funny moments and stuff, but the stakes are high.
And I would be I'd be
oh my God,
my heart
what's
is beating
going
out of
on?
my chest. I'm so nervous to see what's gonna happen. And yeah,
and I think when you're rooting for those characters, a sign that you like the characters and you enjoy them and they're well written is that you're rooting for what's going on. You feel you have a stake in the storyline as well. You're not just watching and seeing what happens. You're oh, please let this work.
Mm-hmm.
Please let it work. And so I just thought
this book you think that like they just dealt with like such a huge giant problem, but like they finally fix it, they're over the hurdle,
and then something else happens.
Immediately it's like something else happens, and it's just like the problems keep being like different. It's not like overdrawn either where it's like, okay, like we get it, like
they can't have anything go their way,
but it's like it's new, it's unique, the problems are different, the solutions are different, and it just kept me at the edge of my seat the entire time I was reading it.
All right, so the third element for what makes a good book is an absorbing story. I feel like that's obviously like pretty basic, but I'm going to go ahead and read what the article considers an absorbing story. When a reader picks up a novel, short story, or other piece of creative writing, they want to be entertained by a good story. From the inciting incident to the rising action to the climax, a great story keeps the reader engaged from the first page onward. Absorbing stories don't happen by accident. Good writers often spend countless hours outlining and diagramming their plots, so they know the page numbers that certain events happen on before they even begin writing. Determining your story structure in advance can ensure that your plot is sustainable and compelling over the course of an entire novel. And then it just talks about kind of outlining in advance, so that's more for a writer than a reader. But we've already talked about this.
Yeah.
But like from beginning to end, you are in it with them. Like there is never a dull moment. I know sometimes in books there's that period of time where it's like we need to either get background or like we need to just like have time go by. So like
what's
this
nice
thing can
about
happen.
this, and this goes into like another thing is like a unique style of the book is like another like thing in the article it talks about. What's nice is that this book kind of, instead of being dull and giving background information, you have these flashbacks to the past where it starts kind of filling in the gaps a little bit of before he went on this mission. There's other characters. It shows like the training for the mission and things like that you start to fill in the pieces. There's another like little twist that happens with that. And so it's not only just like crazy stuff happening while he's in space, but it's also like figuring out and uncovering these things that happened before he even went on the mission in the first place.
Mm-hmm. So it's like that whole like one fun thing about, you know, I feel like in every book that I read, you want like something that you don't know. And you're like, I'm trying to figure out like what's going on. And that can happen in like a thriller, sci-fi, romance. Like it can happen in any style of book where it's like, there's something that I'm not like getting right now. Like something is missing that I don't know. So like with those back and forth chapters, when it's present and he's in the spaceship versus he like gets his memory back, but it's in the form of flashbacks, you get to fill in those gaps and like piece by piece, you as the reader
it's
are like getting that information back.
The author doesn't give you too much to work with too early on because like you don't want to know what's going to happen until like you can brainstorm and try and figure out like what's he going to do with this? How's he going to make this all make sense? But I almost like that he doesn't give you too much to work with because then like you can't figure out what's going to happen.
And you figure it out like with the main character. Like you are in it with him and you get to see like mentally him coming to these conclusions and figuring out stuff as he gets his memory back. And you're like, oh my God, that was crazy. And another thing that makes this an absorbing story is that Andy Weir does such a good job with cliffhangers. Like you finish a chapter and you're like, well, I was going to stop, but now I got to read the next one. And going through, like, how long are those chapters on average? Because the other thing to me, and maybe I'll, like, eat my words here, but I love short chapters because to me, if the chapters are long and it's, like, 20 to, like, 30 pages per chapter, I'm like, oh, that's kind of, like, more than I want to read right now. Even though if a chapter was, like, 5 pages and I just, like, read 5-6 chapters at once, that's the same thing. But a shorter chapter is just a lot more manageable and makes reading go by a lot faster.
These seem like 20-ish pages, which is kind of like on the longer end, but it's
I feel like for
it.
Sci-fi, and like that book is pretty long in general, which is also something that would be like a little bit daunting potentially for new readers because it's 500 some pages, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want that to deter you guys because trust me, like when you're
this
in
is
it,
a gem of a book.
You're in it. The rest of the books are all like pretty average length. This one's the longest one I think by far that we're sharing, but it is so good. So
the last part, sharp dialogue is what makes a good book. So what's nice about this book, especially because there's like some difficulty with communication, there's no fluff with the dialogue. It's all very purposeful, and I love how Andy Weir shows how communication is able to like start taking place between the main characters. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that also just, again, knowing that the characters are just like so well written and thought out, I feel like the characters' dialogue, but also like the internal monologues of just like them sharing their thoughts and stuff and like what they're thinking about, like that just like builds on why you're rooting for them as a character and like why you care about them. Because like I was so sad when I finished this book, so I was like, I don't want these characters to be gone. Like I want to
I wanted to stay in their world.
So it was like finishing the book was happy, but I was like, oh, like I'm sad. I want to be like back in it. So I will definitely at some point probably reread that book, but I have not yet.
One final, just give it its moment. Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir.
Read it for sure.
Incredible book.
Okay, so the next book and our only romance on
we don't have it in person.
This list is November 9th by Colleen Hoover. So again, I'm going to read the main summary here and then we'll kind of get into all the other points. Fallon meets Ben, an aspiring novelist, the day before her scheduled cross-country move. Their untimely interaction leads them to spend Fallon's last day in LA together, and her eventful life becomes the creative inspiration Ben has always sought for his novel. Over time, and amidst the various relationships and tribulations of their own separate lives, they continue to meet on the same date every year. Until one day, Fallon becomes unsure if Ben has been telling her the truth or fabricating a perfect reality for the sake of the ultimate plot twist. Can Ben's relationship with Fallon and simultaneously his novel be considered a love story if it ends in heartbreak?
So this was my first Colleen Hoover book that I ever read, and I'm not one, like, I don't really go back and reread books, and because I don't think I've ever gone back and, like, reread a book. There's books I've thought about, like, oh, I should go, like, reread it. Project Hail Mary is one, and really the only Colleen Hoover book that I've thought, like, I should go back and reread is November 9th, because, like, that's how much I love that book. Like, I devoured that book when I read it the first time.
Like 1 or 2 days for sure.
And I think it's, like, a lot of her books have kind of, like, the same trend, but this one with the timeline I thought was, like, pretty unique and different, and I really liked that about it. So again, starting with the first thing, a strong opening.
I think Colleen Hoover in general does a great job, even if like the openings later on aren't that important. Like she does a great job of grabbing your attention from the very beginning. So I even wrote down like the quote from her first line that she wrote, which was, "I wonder what kind of sound it would make if I were to smash this glass against the side of his head." And I feel like a lot of her books start with that, and like that thought doesn't really matter later on in the book, but it's like as the reader you're thinking, who is she talking to? Why does she want to smash glass against his head?
Why are these like such strong emotions?
Yeah. Like it's, as a reader, it puts those questions in your head that you want answered, and so you want to keep reading. And so Colleen Hoover in general, pretty much I swear like every opening line is like something crazy like that. Like Verity, I just like know someone like got hit by a car or something, and you're like, what? Verity's not on this list, but
I like reading.
I read that and I was like, what? Again, it doesn't matter later on in the book. But you're like, whoa.
You just kind of get, like, thrown into the situation that you're about to start reading about. There's no, like, you don't get the background right away. Like, you're in the midst of usually, like you're thrown into the character's life. You're thrown into a conversation they're having.
Like, just, this is their problem, and you're here too. And you're like, whoa, I don't even know what's going on. So it's kind of, like, fun to get to figure out, like, oh, she's talking to this person.
I think it's nice when books do that rather than, like, give you too much background information at first, just because, like, you'll get the background later. Mm-hmm. You'll find out what you need to know, but here's the thing that's going to get you to want to keep reading first. Let's introduce the problem first. Compelling characters. So the main characters are Ben and Fallon. Ben wants to be an author, but he needs an idea for his big break, and so he also deals a lot with personal and family trauma that informs his character decision-making later on in the book that you don't really, you know it's there, but you don't know a whole lot about it until later on, and you kind of start getting... There's, like, past point of view for this, too, right?
I don't think so. I think it's just... So there's dual POV, which we mentioned in part of, like, the unique
book,
style.
Maybe, that
I mean, like, you get to, like, read his
stuff.
book at, like, the end.
Yeah.
Okay. Or, like, the manuscript or whatever. I don't know.
Don't say manuscript. We're not talking about Verity here.
Yeah. We'll get triggered here. And then Fallon, so she has hopes and dreams of becoming this famous actress. She actually is off to a pretty good start, like, in her acting career. And then all of a sudden she's the victim of a house fire, has these pretty significant burns on her face and kind of over her body that her, like, agent and stuff is kind of like, well, you know, I just don't know if acting is for you. Like, no one's going to really hire you with this look that you have going on. And so I think she, like, steps down for a little bit, but then ultimately decides, you know what, I'm going to move to New York, try some acting out there, and, like, see if I can make it big. And so, like, that's where we kind of meet her. She's, like, literally leaving that night or, like, the next day for New York to move.
So they both have, like, they both meet each other with, like, these other big projects or things that they want to make sure they accomplish on their own. So his is writing his book, and Fallon's trying to like pursue her acting career. And so even though they have like this amazing entire day where they're hanging out and they really enjoy each other's company, they decide that
she's like, well, I'm moving.
Other things are more important to them at this point in time. And so they decide, okay, let's meet back here 1 year from now. We're not going to have literally any contact. Like, I'm not giving you any information other than we are agreeing right now to meet up here 1 year from now. And so the idea itself, like, you just are kind of like, how are they going to make this work? Or like, as the reader, I was kind of like, how are they going to live a whole year of their lives, make this work? What kinds of problems? Like, you don't have any form of communication. So if something does come up, what are they going to do? How are they going to solve that? And it doesn't really even, like, it doesn't follow the characters at all into, like, these other lives that they're living.
Like, the only thing we get is, like, when they're like, oh, like, how's your last year been? And oh, like, I've done X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
That's
so
it.
It literally just jumps, like, from...
Like, those days are the only days that matter.
And then next year. And so that's where it starts off at. And so that idea to me is, like, just very intriguing because I want to see, like, what's happened in the past year of their lives. It's a romance book, so you're obviously, like, rooting for them and they have, like, strong feelings for each other. But, like, a whole year, these people are human and they have no way to communicate and they don't fully, like, share their feelings or their plans for any future. And they kind of are, like, they're trying to think in their head, like, themselves, is this relationship, like, something that's important to me and that I care enough about, where, like, this whole 5-year thing is stupid? Like, what are we even doing? But then, like, they kind of keep reinforcing the importance of, like, no, this was
the idea
really
for the book.
important of us, like, for us to do. And so you're kind of, like, frustrated because you're like, you guys just, like,
chill,
stop, like, communicate.
Yeah.
But it's fun.
And a reason why I think, like, this is a good romance book for you to, like, get into the genre is that, like, it's pretty common for most romance books to, like, have, like, some, like, lull in the plot or, like, whatever, just 'cause, like, that is the nature of, like, when you have this new relationship that's forming. But with this book being packed in just, like, literally, like, 5 or 6 days, I don't fully remember, but, like, truly it is just one day at a time. It is all action all the time because, like, that is the only time they're seeing each other.
So a lot is happening.
And it's, like, crazy things happen. Like, they'll meet for, like, 1 year and you're like, whoa, what happened within this past year?
Yeah, you're like, guys.
And then, like, things maybe don't go so well. And then, like, maybe they're going to stop doing the meetups, but maybe they won't. I don't know. So, and then, like, the end, crazy ending. Like, crazy twist, crazy reveal that I was like, oh, my God, no way.
So, again, just kind of jumping to, like, number 3, an absorbing story. We've already been talking about that and how, like, this is the fastest-paced romance book that we've probably both read. And it just keeps you super interested the entire time you're reading it.
And it's also, like, there's other stuff. Like, you meet other characters, not just, like, the two main characters. Like, you get to meet some of Ben's family and, like, you learn about Fallon, like, some of her issues with her dad. So it's not just, like, them two together. Like, they have to navigate other issues that they're each facing somehow within, like, the one day that they're together each year.
And then sharp dialogue. We didn't really have anything, like, specific for this book, but, you know, I'm sure the dialogue was great between the characters.
And then we already did mention this, but, like, for unique style, it's a dual POV book, and so each chapter goes back and forth between, like, here's Fallon's point of view, and then here's Ben's point of view. I love a romance with a dual POV. Like, you want to know what both
of them are thinking. And sometimes dual romances will, like, have both of them reflect, like, on, like, the same thing at the same point in time, but for the most part, like, they'll kind of just, like, pick up where the other left off, and then, like, time will continue on. I love a dual POV. So, and Colleen Hoover's really, a lot of her books do that. So,
So I think that is pretty much it for November 9th.
Okay.
Next one is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, or however you say his name.
So like I said, this was the book that I brought with me on spring break 2021.
Like, not spring break, but it was like our summer break thing.
True, yes. And so I had seen this, I think Brooke Michio read this, and so she kind of hyped it up a lot, and so I was like, okay, I am interested, because this is like a thriller type of book. And so again, like Ciera just mentioned, I didn't really go into, oh, like, romance is going to be my favorite genre ever, like, I'm going to get a bunch of romance books. So I went into, like, the thriller mystery type of books first, and I picked this one up. And we'll start with a summary. How about that?
Sure.
So, Alicia Berenson's life is seemingly perfect. A famous painter married to an in-demand fashion photographer, she lives in a grand house with big windows overlooking a park in one of London's most desirable areas. One evening, her husband Gabriel returns home late from a fashion shoot, and Alicia shoots him 5 times in the face and then never speaks another word. Alicia's refusal to talk or give any kind of explanation turns a domestic tragedy into something far grander, a mystery that captures the public imagination and casts Alicia into notoriety. The price of her art skyrockets, and she, the silent patient, is hidden away from the tabloids and spotlight at the Grove, a secure forensic unit in North London. Theo Faber is a criminal psychotherapist who has waited a long time for the opportunity to work with Alicia. His determination to get her to talk and unravel the mystery of why she shot her husband, it takes him down a twisting path into his own motivations, a search for the truth that threatens to consume him. I mean, that summary right there, it's a pretty intense book. But like it's not scary or anything like that.
So the strong opening, this book, again, put like the first kind of line of the book is just Alicia Berenson was 33 years old when she killed her husband. And like some people might dislike that. To me, I liked it because it was just like short to the point and it instantly like lays it out. And you're like, why? And then within like the first page or two, it kind of like relays the details and circumstances of the husband's death. Kind of just like how the summary did, where it's just like this quick and dirty, like this happened, this happened, this happened.
It lays the groundwork.
And like she's not talking. And we're like, why? Like that's how I felt after reading the summary. That's how I felt after reading the first couple of pages. I was like, why? One, why did she kill him? 2, now why is she not talking? Mm-hmm. And like those are the 2 main questions that I had when I was reading, and why I wanted to continue reading.
And that's what the main character, which like Alicia is kind of the main character, but really the psychotherapist is the main character in this book, and that's his question too, is why is she not talking? How can I try to get her to start talking? So in terms of compelling characters, we have Theo Faber and we have Alicia Berenson. So he's the psychotherapist. He's trying to obviously understand Alicia's story, but then also you do get insight into his own home life, and kind of like it's following him for the most part because he's the main character of the book. So you get insight into his relationships and things like that. And then Alicia Berenson, she doesn't talk in the book, but you do get insight into her own thoughts with different journal entries that she's written from the past that are inserted into the book.
Mm-hmm. And I believe Theo is reading these, right? Like he found them, so he's reading them?
Maybe.
I think.
I'm not
I could be lying, but I'm pretty sure he's reading them.
So that's kind of how you get insight into her, because otherwise you really don't know a whole lot about Alicia Berenson. And that's kind of like what makes the mystery better, because you see a seemingly normal person writing these journal entries out, and then you're kind of like, how did we get here where we are now, where she's not talking, she killed her husband, what happened?
And so I think that kind of leads into, like, for the absorbing story, like it kind of switches back and forth between Theo talking to Alicia in her, like, not really cell, but like her room, I guess, and then it will we'll get a journal entry that like we're reading that's obviously from past Alicia before all this crazy stuff happened. And like her journals will start like farther in the past, and like we'll gradually get closer and closer and closer to like the journal where she like right before she killed her husband and stuff. And like we'll see her thoughts change. Maybe she's like getting a little bit paranoid about some stuff. Like we just see how someone who's like seemingly normal can like go to killing her husband basically. And then you kind of get like these mix of like, okay, we have the present going on, just like in general her journals are going on, and we kind of like end up suddenly we're in one spot.
Everything collides. Huge plot twist in this book, at least for me. But I think that's the general reaction when people read this book. What I really hate is a book that has like a plot twist you can see from a mile away. One of our other books, in my opinion, has that, but it like wasn't the main purpose of the book, so it doesn't really matter. That's why we're still recommending it. But this book, Ciera caught on a couple pages before I did.
Like one page.
It
was like when I think I found it when I was supposed to, though.
Yeah. So for me, I was reading this book like in the bedroom of the Airbnb where we were staying in, just kind of like, I think I was like reading a couple more pages before like I had to go shower or something. And so it was such an immediate, this is the plot twist, and I did not see it coming at all until I just read it happen on the page. And because sometimes like in a book, like you get an inkling.
Like, oh wait,
you're kind of like, this is what I think is going to happen. And obviously, like, that's still a pretty good plot twist. But I read the plot twist of this book.
And then you're like,
I turned to Ciera and I was like, I just read the plot twist of my book. Because I was just like, whoa. I was so just not expecting it at all. And then it just kind of like you have to take a moment to just like rethink everything you just read, the entire book, because you're like, I'm so confused now. And then obviously like the rest of the book helps to kind of clear things up a little bit.
I will say, like, I know some people have read this book and they thought like the beginning was slow and stuff. I personally thought it was interesting like the entire way through. I can see how people would think it was slow and stuff. But to me, like, the plot twist itself is just like so worth it.
Have Maggie and Haley read this book?
Yeah. I think they both gave it 5 stars. Yeah. At least 4. And to me, a 4 is a good book. So anything else? I didn't really think of like any specific like dialogue that I could think of for this book. And I already mentioned like the mix of journal entries and whatnot. So Silent Patient, great book. Biggest plot twist of my life that I've read thus far. So the next book is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. We had to get a recommendation for like some YA mystery out there because we've read quite a few trilogies at this point within this genre. And I think this one is definitely our favorite.
Yeah. We were kind of stuck between where like, did we want to put the Inheritance Games or do we want to put A Good Girl's Guide to Murder? And I do think I preferred this series a little bit more. And I think there's a little bit more going on. And sometimes I think the Inheritance Games can be like a little tricky to follow sometimes versus this is...
It's pretty easy to remember like what's going on and stuff. So, summary for this one. The case is closed. 5 years ago, schoolgirl Andy Bell was murdered by Sal Singh. The police know he did it. Everyone in town knows he did it. But having grown up in the same small town that was consumed by the murder, Pippa Fitz-and-Moby isn't so sure. When she chooses the case as a topic for her final year project, she starts to uncover secrets that someone in town desperately wants to stay hidden. And if the real killer is still out there, how far will they go to keep Pip from the truth? So, one thing great about this is that if you like this book, there are 2 other books in the series. It's a whole trilogy, and each book
I think they just get better
and
better the more you read. Like the last book, especially in this series, was like
it's wild.
It was such a different thing than I was expecting. It was truly wild.
Anyway, so as far as like the opening for this book, it starts with one like this book kind of is cool because the whole trilogy does this sort of like mixed media approach where it'll show like snippets from police reports. It'll show like some of her audio files for when she's doing her podcast.
That's like her big project.
It'll show like diary entries and stuff from people. It'll show like computer files. So there's like some mixed media stuff that makes it kind of cool that you get to see as a reader. So it starts with like the image of like Pip's like project proposal for her like capstone project. And then the first chapter is just running through like, I just kind of like read it and skimmed it yesterday to like double check what the opening was. And it's basically just kind of like this poor, like, the poor Singh family, like, their son is, like, a convicted killer, but he's dead. Like, poor them, poor them, poor them. And you're, like, getting this idea, like, through the lens of Pip, who's the main character. And then, like, within the first couple of pages, she's, like, knocking on their front door saying, hey, can I talk to you about your brother who's dead who, like, killed, supposedly, this girl? And, like, that's how it starts. So I feel like as the reader, I was like, oh, dang, like, we're getting right into it.
Mm-hmm. Compelling characters. So Pip, she's the main character, and then Ravi is also heavily involved in the books, and he is the brother of the convicted killer who's now dead. And so you're kind of like, that's an unusual like alliance,
unusual max,
to have going there. And then Andy and Sal are both dead. Andy is the one that was murdered, and then Sal is the one who was convicted of killing her.
But they also, like, were dating. Like, Sal and Andy were dating, so it's like, we think she was killed by the boyfriend. Like, that kind of is the thought right now.
And so you kind of, like, learn about them mostly through other people. There's not really, like, flashbacks or anything that, like, is them, like, jumping to these characters interacting. They're kept pretty, like, mysterious and, like, you don't know a whole lot about them.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that's interesting, not so much for Sal, but more with Andy, is like she's like this mystery girl who's like by, hearing the other characters that are interviewed throughout the book and like their relationships to her, like their experiences that they've had with her, we get like this picture of Andy revealed, and she's potentially different than what she was made out to be at the start of the book. And you're like, oh, okay, so Andy's not quite the girl like next door that we thought she was.
And then third thing is an absorbing story. So this is a pretty classic whodunit type of novel where you're trying to work with Pip to figure out what can she uncover, who is the person behind this, if it's not Sal, because obviously like Sal has already been the convicted person of like, oh, this is who killed Andy, and Pip is saying, I don't think so. And so you're trying to figure out, okay, if it's not him, who is it? And so it's fun to see you're going through the book as she's getting this new information, trying to kind of put the pieces together with her.
And, like, you can play along. That's definitely, like, I try and do that for the most part with these kinds of books. I do not know of anyone who's guessed the reveal because I was like, what is going on? Like, no way. So I thought it was a crazy reveal. Not, like, the moment that, like, the silent patient had, but, like, the plot twist itself is like, whoa.
I also feel like what's really
and
fun
it's like a
about
double plot
this
twist
trilogy is you have this mystery in this book. And then you kind of like, we really like, there's another mystery going on in this town in the second book. So you're kind of like, you go along with it and it's different and interesting in its own way. And then the third book, you realize that everything
it's all connected.
Was all connected.
Manifest.
Even though it didn't seem like
everything's connected.
So that was a really satisfying ending, in my opinion. That was like, I rated that book 5 stars, whereas like the other 2 books in the series, I think I rated like 4 stars because it made everything click. So motivation for you to read the whole series.
As far as sharp dialogue, I thought it was fun for this book. A lot of the interviews are kind of shown in this sort of like transcript layout where it's like you're seeing their dialogue, but like it's in a transcript form since it's a podcast. And I think it's cool because like as these characters are being interviewed, you get a sense of like maybe like where they're insecure in like themselves, or like where they're iffy about their alibis, where they get nervous sharing certain parts of like stories. And so you kind of like get to know these characters and like be suspicious of them, or like maybe you rule them out. And like I just think it's fun to like play along with like based off of what they're telling Pip during these interviews.
Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into, unless there's anything else you wanted to add.
Nope, I think we can jump into the last one here.
So our final book recommendation for this episode is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is the only book I've read by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And I remember when I first read it, this was like really bad of me, but I think when I first read it, I rated it 3 stars. And then upon further reflection, I ended up going back and rating it 4 stars. And I feel like my appreciation grew for it after the fact, because one thing you should know about this book is that it is about the journey and not the destination. There's a possible potential plot twist in this, but in my opinion, I saw it coming from a mile away, and it really wasn't the main point of the book. So I will read the summary. So, aging and reclusive Hollywood movie icon Evelyn Hugo is finally ready to tell the truth about her glamorous and scandalous life. But when she chooses Unknown magazine reporter Monique Grant for the job, no one is more astounded than Monique herself. Why her? Why now? Monique is not exactly on top of the world. Her husband has left her, and her professional life is going nowhere. Regardless of why Evelyn has selected her to write her biography, Monique is determined to use this opportunity to jumpstart her career. Summoned to Evelyn's luxurious apartment, Monique listens in fascination as the actress tells her story. From making her way to Los Angeles in the 1950s to her decision to leave show business in the 80s, and of course the 7 husbands along the way, Evelyn unspools a tale of ruthless ambition, unexpected friendship, and a great forbidden love. Monique begins to feel very real connections to the legendary star, but as Evelyn's story nears its conclusion, it becomes clear that her life intersects with Monique's own in tragic and irreversible ways.
All right, so as far as the opening for this book, it starts off with, again, like, this book also has sort of a mixed media vibe where you get, like, the initial, like, press release of, like, oh, Evelyn Hugo's auctioning off all, like, her famous dresses, and then at the end of a few chapters, you get, like, these tabloid snippets from, like, this Sub Rosa paper where just kind of, like, every once in a while, like, during different phases of Evelyn's life, it's like, oh, Evelyn's with this new guy, like, blah, 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 like, things aren't looking so hot in Hollywood, like, I don't know, just, like, you get some fun little snippets throughout the book. And then after, like, the press release for, like, oh, she's auctioning off her gowns, that's when we get to meet Monique herself, and we're initially brought into, like, oh, she's being called into the office at the magazine that she works at, and they're like, Evelyn Hugo, like, wants you to, like, write her biography. We don't know why, but she wants you to do it, and only you, otherwise she's not doing it. And so I think as the reader, like Megan mentioned, like, there's this plot twist at the end, and I think that the plot twist helps at first set up, like, the why, like, why you want to keep reading. I'm like, oh, like, why is Monique being offered the job? Like, to me, that's why it's, like, that initial hook. But I wouldn't, if I was you, I would not hold on to that being like, this is what I want to find out when I'm reading. Like, this is the point of the book.
And I think that's what I kind of, like, was getting. I think that's what helped me, like, not enjoy it the first time that I, like, went through and read it, because really, when I was reading this book, the present day stuff with Monique and Evelyn, like, I really didn't care that much
that
about.
stuff, not the best.
I wanted to read, like, the flashbacks. What I loved was, like, the chapters of these books were named after each of her 7 husbands. And so you kind of, like, before you go into it, you're just like, 7 husbands? Like, how?
How does that happen?
How does that happen? And this just lays out, like, this crazy Hollywood lifestyle that you hear her reasoning behind, like, this is why it made sense for me. You know, she's, like, Evelyn's not, like, a perfect human being. She's in the industry. She's going after what she wants. And some of these relationships are definitely just, like, a means to an end. And then, you know, on to the next one. And then some of them are more meaningful to her. And it was just interesting to see the journey of her life.
Yeah. Like, truly, I want to emphasize, if you have not read this book, it is about the journey and, like, reading her life. The plot twist at the end, maybe will, like, make the book for you. Maybe it'll make it a little bit better. To me, it was like, like, okay. But, like, truly, like, to me, if the book was just, like, literally Evelyn's life, it would have been a great book.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, it was written the way it was, so we have to work through the parts with Monique and, like, interviewing and stuff. And, like, that stuff was fine. I just was like, oh, like, let's get back into the story. Like, Evelyn, tell more of your life.
Yeah. So Ciera wrote on here, like, for the compelling characters, Evelyn gives off, like, she's a force to be reckoned with, especially her past self. Like, she's still spunky in her older age, too. But she gives off, like, Miranda Priestley vibes if you've watched Devil Wears Prada. And just, like, kind of like she is the boss woman. She knows what she wants. And she's going to do what she needs to do to make that happen.
Monique, honestly, like, she has her own storyline. And the thing I said, like, her life is, like, she's getting divorced. Truly, I don't care about Monique. Like, sorry, girl.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, yeah, she had marriage problems. I forgot about that. Like, to me, it is not about Monique. It is about Evelyn. And the story is, like, when she gets those flashbacks going, like, that's the book.
Yeah. I was going to say something else, too, but I forgot. Sharp dialogue. So this book is very dialogue heavy, especially during Evelyn's retelling of stuff. The retelling is, like, it basically jumps back in time and is kind of like you're
They're with
living
them.
through that with Evelyn, and, like, it seems like it's present at the time. She recounts conversations she's had with important people throughout her life, and that helps to keep things pretty fast-paced and moving forward.
Mm-hmm. And I think, like, the good thing about, you know, she obviously has 7 husbands, and so you get to, like, meet each of those characters and how she interacts with them.
They're so different.
They are, like,
have
vastly
different
different.
personalities.
And so it's, like, kind of cool to see, like, the conversations and how she interacts with each of those husbands, like, changes depending on who she's with.
Yeah. I remember what I was going to say. One of the other things that helped me to recognize how good this book was after I read it was, like, thinking about this book. It's supposed to be made into, like, a movie with Netflix, I think. That was supposedly in the works. And then the more we thought about, the more, like, because we were talking about that when we found out, this would be the perfect opportunity to make a docuseries.
Not docuseries, a limited series.
Yeah, a limited series with each episode as a husband. Like, if they don't switch this from being a movie to a limited series, what a missed opportunity. Because, like, there's so much meat in this that it could be a limited series. Like, a movie is going to fly by.
Truly.
I just don't think that it'd be the right move. But that's just, like, I feel like you could have such a fun time with, like, the time period that this is set in, and, like, the visuals that they could provide with a limited series for this book would be so, like, good.
Please get on it, Netflix. I'm begging you. Any other unique style stuff that we haven't yet talked about? No, I think we covered those. So basically just, like, the book being split into the parts of, like, husband. Like, the first one is, I don't remember his name. One is Don Adler. I remember that. He's a husband in there at some point. And yeah, I really enjoyed the book overall. I think it's a good book to get back into if you're not sure what kind of style of book you're looking for. I don't know what that one, like, I mean, fiction. Like, it's not romance, so.
Like, it talks about her husband and stuff, but yeah, it's not, I wouldn't consider it romance. It just is. It's kind of its own thing.
Yeah. Like, it lives on our romance shelf, but we, like, just don't know where else to put it.
So, those would be our 5 book recommendations to get yourselves back into reading. If you've read any of these books, let us know what you thought of them, because I definitely want to, obviously we hyped them up enough, so maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. We can chat.
Feel free to leave any book recommendations for us or other listeners in the comments if you're watching YouTube, or on Instagram if you want to just go to our post there. And let's just talk about books. It's always a fun time.
We always post our podcasts every Thursday morning, so subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can watch the video version, or make sure you subscribe to wherever you listen, Spotify, Apple, I don't know where podcasts on Apple stuff.
Apple Podcasts.
Yeah. Otherwise, we will talk to you guys next Thursday.
Bye.